that we have started. I mean, don't think we haven't started just because I'm sitting here apparently talking trivia. Because it's all this, it doesn't matter. Profound philosophy, trivia, it's all the same. It's all this. You see, so we have started, it's all this. That's what this is about. There's just whatever's happening. Talking about pouring glasses of water, talking about deep philosophy. That's the heart of non-duality. It's just what's happening. This is all there is. I mean, how many words, I mean, those of you who are familiar with this, how many times have you read those words, heard those words, heard other people say those words, heard me say those words? This is it. This is all there is. What do we mean about, by this phrase, seeing non-duality? I mean, it's a ridiculous phrase in any case. We have to use words. I have to say something. And I can't think of saying anything better than talking about seeing non-duality, even though that's a nonsense. You can't see non-duality. How can you see non-duality? It's absolutely ridiculous. But if I said any other phrase, it would be even more ridiculous. Maybe the realization of this, but that sounds too abstract, I don't know. But whatever it is we're talking about here, it does have something to do with non-duality. And it does, this phrase, seeing it, realizing it, whatever, it doesn't necessarily bring about any changes, but it does tend to bring about a transformation. And we could talk about that transformation in many different ways, but that, how I just started back then, is one way of describing it. What's involved in seeing non-duality? Well, the sense of self collapses. That's all. The sense of self collapses. It's just recognised, seen, whatever word we want to use, that there is no self, that the self is an absolute illusion. And the word illusion is not one I use very often. And then it's seen that all there is this. Drinking water, starting up video cameras, sitting in chairs, looking at each other, noticing the colour of a t-shirt, the colour of a shirt. Seems to me a lot of philosophy is about the question in some way or other, and often concealed in different ways, but basically the question that a lot of philosophy addresses is what is real, what can be considered to be real. We have philosophies which we could build into a ladder which would reach to the moon and back if we wanted to, all trying to answer that question, what is real? And the collapse of the self, which is what we're talking about here really. Seeing non-duality involves the collapse of the self. And the collapse of the self consists in a way, or reveals in a way, that the answer to that question, what is real, is so startlingly obvious that we might end up rolling around on the floor laughing at the thought that we ever asked it in the first place, and certainly the thought that somebody once wrote a 15-volume history of Western thought in an attempt to answer it. Because what's revealed when the sense of self collapses is what is real, this is real. This is real. What do I mean by this? Just whatever's happening. And if that's beginning to sound like a tautology going round in circles, it actually isn't. I mean, it kind of might seem like that to the mind, but when it's actually seen, it's kind of like, wow, this is so damned obvious. All there ever is this. What does this mean? Whatever is happening. What does whatever is happening mean? Well, whatever experiences are arising, whatever experiences are happening right now is the whole of existence. There is nothing else. It is staggeringly simple. And at that point, the whole of Western, and actually quite a lot of Eastern philosophy tends to collapse. And maybe a few days later you might be seen loading your encyclopedias of philosophy into the back of a van and driving them to a charity shop, or even worse, to the city dump. I don't know if you have city dumps out here, but we have city dumps in my country where you can drive your unwanted stuff. And once non-duality has been seen, that might include your 25-volume history of Western thought. It's just so staggeringly simple. How are we going to sit here all afternoon and another afternoon tomorrow maybe and talk about something which is so unbelievably simple? Maybe the way we're going to get through it, other than by casting our minds into the imagined future and thinking of chocolate, biscuits and coffee, which will turn up later maybe, and which we notice also only exist in this. That thought about a possible coffee break and chocolate biscuits later on also only exists in this. Why does it only exist in this? Because there isn't anywhere else for it to exist. There isn't anywhere else for it to exist because there isn't anywhere else. If we want, we can call this the present moment. It isn't really the present moment. It's just timeless, timelessness. I could say this is the eternal now, but that phrase sounds a bit pompous perhaps. This is the eternal now. This is any thought. In a way, when I sit down in a chair like this and open my mouth and sort of hope that some kind of articulate sound comes out, I never quite know where I'm going to begin, but sometimes it's at this point. And I feel, in a way, that what I'm saying is both extremely challenging, but also in another way, it's absolutely obvious. To use an English phrase, it's bleeding obvious. It is in the realm of the bleeding obvious. I mean, it's very challenging in a way. The mind is, some minds go completely kind of crazy at the assertion from somebody sitting at the front of a room that this is all there is. You know, you say, well, excuse me, what about Canada? Isn't Canada part of all that's arising right now? Well, of course it is, yeah, as an idea, as a thought, yeah. But what about my birthday next week when I planned a big party? Well, yeah, of course that's part of this, as an idea, as a thought arising in this. I mean, in a way, it's very challenging. I mean, the mind is likely to hear this as an assertion that there is no time and there is no space. Actually, that is what is being asserted here, that there is no time and no space. But maybe we'll get onto that later. I don't want to cover too much ground at once. So, you know, in a way, this is very, very challenging for the mind. But in another way, it does lie in the realm of the absolutely obvious. From another perspective, isn't it obvious? I have to use a time phrase for this question. I just have to, because it's the way language works, but of course it's misleading. So just forgive me. Isn't it obvious that all you have ever experienced? Now you see how ridiculous that question is in light of what I'm saying, but never mind, just go with it, because language is dualistic and we're trying to talk about non-duality. Isn't it obvious that everything that you have ever experienced, and isn't it obvious that everything you ever will experience has only happened, will only happen, and can only happen in this? I mean, isn't that, as well as being challenging and as well as perhaps sounding completely mad, also absolutely and staggeringly obvious? Nobody sitting in this room has ever experienced 1 second of the past. Now, you may have experienced emotions which seem to be about the past, you may have experienced thoughts which seem to be about the past, but you've only experienced those thoughts and emotions in this. Nobody's ever experienced those thoughts, nobody's ever experienced a thought or emotion 10 seconds ago. And the same for the future. You may be thinking about what you might have for breakfast tomorrow morning, but that thought can only arise in this. So, in a way, I'm saying that seeing non-duality is the collapse of space and time, and that is an extremely challenging thing to say. And in another way, it's bleeding obvious. It's just completely obvious that there is just this. If anything's real, and we can come back to that if we want to, but if anything's real, this is what's real. And you might say, well, is everything else imaginary? No, everything else is real too, because it can only arise in this, whatever the thought is. So part of seeing non-duality is the collapse of time and space. And the recognition that in this there is no person. There is no solidity here. There is no solidity there or there or there. If you like, there's just empty space in which an appearance of life happening emerges or appears. What is this? It's emptiness. It's eternal emptiness, it's timeless emptiness, in which there appears to be a drama unfolding that we call life. I don't know if any of you watch boxed sets on your televisions at home. I don't have the patience, but you can probably get a box set of your favourite television drama that has sort of 60 episodes. That's 60 hours of delicious watching with popcorn and beer. That's kind of what this is. This is the box set known as life. This is the box set that we normally call actual life, real life. And it's very convincing. So are some of the box sets that you watch on your television. Some of those are pretty convincing as well. So this is absolutely real, and it's a kind of dream. It's absolutely real. This is the realest reality there is. This is even more real than that box set of Breaking Bad or Mad Men that you may have watched. And it's also like Breaking Bad and like Mad Men and like the dream that you may have had last night, to bring in a time phrase, a very confusing time phrase. It's also a kind of dream. It's a kind of dream. It's absolutely the most reality there is, and it's a kind of dream. And there's nobody in it. There's nobody in it living it. And the sense that there's somebody in it, the sense that there is a solid person in there living it, is part of the dream. Just as you may have had a dream last night, and in that dream there may have been a person that kind of appeared to be you. They had your thoughts, your feelings, your name, they performed your actions. And they did something because it was a dream, maybe a bit peculiar, a bit surreal, maybe that you could fly in that dream, who knows? But just as now you can see that that was a dream. It was kind of real. We can't say it was unreal, which was sort of, the dream that's unreal is the one you didn't have, the one that didn't happen. So we can't just say, well, that dream was unreal, because something happened, but the thing that happened wasn't a real thing. So we could say, well, it was a dream, it was an appearance, kind of illusion, if you like. So just as now you have woken up from that nighttime dream, when you wake up to this daytime dream, or if you have already woken up to this daytime dream, which you may well have done, then it's seen that in a similar way, not in an identical way, but in a similar way, this is a daytime dream. It's not identical. It seems to have more solidity to it, but then notice that when you were in the nighttime dream, that too seemed to have a lot of solidity. This seems to be absolutely real until it's recognised that it's not just real, it's also unreal. But notice that the dream you had last night seemed absolutely real while it was going on. It's only when you woke up from it that it was seen and known absolutely that it was a nighttime dream and not what we normally take for reality. So seeing non-duality, waking up as it's sometimes called, awakening as it's sometimes called, liberation as it's sometimes called, these are all inadequate and somewhat even stupid words. But something happens to an apparent someone, we can assert that, and that's a kind of waking up. It's not identical to waking up from the nighttime dream, because you notice that when you wake up from the nighttime dream, the dream stops, that's it. And the character, you the character in the nighttime dream, dies when that dream ends. And then you, the different character in the daytime dream takes up its place again. But it's known absolutely, as soon as you woke up, that that dream, however real it felt when you were having it, was a kind of illusion. And so waking up in the sense that we're talking about it here, waking up to the reality of non-duality, to the reality of the lack of the self, the non-existence of the ego, the non-existence of the person. It's a bit like that. Except that unless you have a heart attack at the same time, you don't die physically at that time. You die as a person, but you don't die as what I sometimes, perhaps uncharmingly, call a psychophysical organism. The psychophysical organism goes on, but the person dies when there's waking up to the reality of non-duality in the way we're talking about it here. The person dies and they tend to take with them all sorts of things that we could call in a way luggage that the person carries around. I mean, being a person can often feel quite heavy and quite tiring and quite depressing in some ways for some of us, and some of that is because the person tends to carry a lot of luggage around with them, because the person tends to carry with them a lot of feelings and beliefs about stuff. So for example, the one who feels separate, the person who feels like they are real, moving around in a separate world, tends to carry around with them a kind of quite a heavy suitcase which we could call responsibility, for example. Free will and responsibility, that's something that most people, it's a kind of piece of luggage that most people feel that they have, and a lot of people feel it's very important to them. And without free will and responsibility, they wouldn't be who they are. Well, guess what? When waking up occurs, free will and responsibility disappear, and it turns out you are not the person that you thought you were. So the person can often carry around a lot of baggage, a lot of luggage with them. Free will and responsibility. See, once you got your free will and responsibility luggage, and you don't have to go out and buy that. That is given to you usually as a free gift by the very loving adults around you. If you're really unlucky, round about the age of 2, if you're a bit more, if you have less psychopathic parents than that, then maybe by the time you're about 4, 5, 6, 7, it's very difficult to get beyond the age of 8 without having been given this very precious gift by the teachers and parents around you. Oh, and by the way, you're responsible for something called your life, and you have free will, so you better use it carefully. So you're kind of given this heavy suitcase as a gift, a very charming gift to carry around with you. No wonder life gets tiring. And almost certainly, if you open that suitcase and try to unpack it, you'll come across a really heavy parcel wrapped in brown paper that's been put in there and it's labelled morality. So these things go together like cherries and cream. Once you've got responsibility and free will, you've got morality. Because that's what your responsibility consists of, using your free will wisely and well. So person, the one who feels like they are this wonderful, unique individual. It's supposed to be a really precious gift, you know, this gift of absolute, wonderful, unique individuality. You know, the most precious gift a human being can have, free will. Oh, isn't it wonderful? You know, it's a curse, really. It's really a curse. It's a bit like, it's not an exact picture here, but it's a little bit like the bad fairy in the Sleeping Beauty story, isn't it? All the good fairies line up and they give the little baby's Sleeping Beauty that she's going to become, they give her really nice things. I don't know what they are, I don't know, but really nice things, and then the wicked fairy comes along and gives her the curse that she will fall asleep for 100. Well, she gives her the curse that she will prick her needle and die, originally. That's the original curse, isn't it? And then the last good fairy hasn't given her gift yet, so her gift is to lessen the curse to being asleep for 100 years. Well, that's in a way what morality, free will and responsibility are. You know, it's like this wonderful gift, but actually given to us by the wicked fairy, which will curse us for the rest of our lives, one way or the other. Most of us will then spend our lives either tying ourselves in knots, trying to live up to this ridiculous package of morality, responsibility, and whatever the third thing was, free will, of course, or we'll spend our lives kind of deliberately turning our back on it and becoming utterly self-destructive, one or the other, and then bang, one day, maybe the ultimate curse falls upon us, non-duality is seen. It's the collapse of the person, and it's like, my God, none of that's real. And it just all falls away. It all falls away. There are no rules about this, absolutely no rules whatsoever, but sometimes when non-duality is seen, there can be an outbreak of laughter. Sometimes it might be hysterical laughter. And sometimes when non-duality is seen with or without the laughter, there can be a sense of lightness and freedom. And that sense of lightness and freedom may be about all sorts of things, but almost certainly part of it is about putting down those bloody heavy suitcases. My God, it's just a story. The freedom, responsibility, commitment, morality and religion story. In all their numerous forms, all the multifarious forms they take, because the imagination of humankind is endlessly, fascinatingly creative. And it all just collapses in a moment. It collapses in a moment. Because it all hangs on the existence of a separate self who has something called responsibility. I mean, the mind can spend decades, some minds do, some minds spend decades trying to deconstruct different moralities philosophically and write books about it. And after 40 or 50 years, perhaps, really manage to deconstruct whatever story the wicked fairy landed them with when they were 3 years old, whatever it might have been. And in one split second, all of that can collapse, just in one split second, because it all hangs on this central, the word that popped into my head there was belief, but it's far more than a belief. It's like an absolute sense, an absolute reality, it seems, that it's gone. All of it just hangs on this central peg that there is a self. There's an autonomous self with this magic thing called free will. Nobody has ever, in the entire history of the world and in the entire history of philosophy, nobody has ever been able to explain how free will operates or what or who it is that operates it. And yet, here we all are, indoctrinated into all the multifarious stories of what life is about that exist in the world, are hung from this absolute central peg. And that central peg is not quite central, because that can only, the screws that hold, and this metaphor is getting too tortuous, forgive me, I won't take you any further than this, but the screws that hold the central peg of free will to the wall are an even more central story, that there is a self that can possess that gift called free will. And seeing non-duality, it's just like the plaster crumbling away and the screws fall out of the wall and the hook falls to the floor, and with it, it takes everything that was hung on it. All the beliefs, all the stories, and then there's nothing left except this. Back to where I started from. There's nothing left except this. All that's left is whatever is arising. So the screws come loose from the wall, the whole lot falls onto the floor, the self is seen through, and then whatever the stories were, no more. I love existentialism, I love it, but no more existentialism. No more Catholicism, no more saving the planet's ecology. I mean, any of that can still go on as a kind of hobby. It's fine, it's fine, but there's a lot of difference between, oh, what's your hobby? I'm a Roman Catholic. What's your hobby? What's your hobby? Oh, I'm saving. What's your hobby? I collect beer mats. What's your hobby? I'm saving the world. Oh, that's nice. So's collecting beer mats. That's nice too. There's an awful lot. So, any of that stuff can go on. But that heavy, serious, I am responsible for saving souls or saving the planet. It doesn't matter which. I mean, it's all the same stuff, isn't it? I'm saving souls for Christ. I'm saving the planet for posterity. It's the same thing. That heaviness just disappears. It's gone because it's nonsense. It's meaningless. There's no planet to save and there's no one to save it. There are no souls. Believe me, there are no souls to save and there is no one to save them. I hope there are no Lutheran priests in this room. And if there are, I hope you are a Lutheran priest of an enormously liberal disposition, which I know some Lutheran priests are, which is fine. Well, it's all fine, but I just don't want to upset anyone. I come all the way from London to Newlip to upset people. Well, that would be a ridiculous thing to do. So really, what are we talking about? We're just seeing through that. We're talking about seeing through that upon which everything else hangs. The fact that there's a self here. The fact there's a person here who has a life. And that can be over in an instant. That can be over in an instant. Leaving this, and if that ain't good enough, kind of tough. Because that's all there is. But when the self collapses, it's quite likely that this will be good enough. It's quite likely that seeing this for the first time, seeing the colour of that t-shirt, the colour of that shirt, seeing the grass for the first time, seeing the plants and the hedge, seeing the flowers for the first time, it's quite likely that that will be enough. Because what makes it not seem enough is just the fact that there's a person there looking at it. And the person's got these other concerns. I mean, to be honest, if it's a person, I wake up in the morning and I feel like, okay, I've got to get on with saving the planet today. I mean, to be honest, the grass is a bit insignificant, isn't it? Really, because I've got much more important things to do. But when that collapses and all those important things just go bang, there's the grass. I quote this story often. I quote this story far too often, but it's a story that Tony tells about how somebody rang him up and there'd just been, the sudden seeing of this, and this chap phoned Tony up and said, I've been sitting in the garden for half an hour watching an ant crawling over a twig. And it's, right, well, why is it even worth, well, yes, I mean, that does sum it up, Anyone where there's been this collapse, that is a self-destructive sentence, by the way. Anyone where there's been this collapse, which is if there has been this collapse, then there isn't anyone. So where there has been this collapse, it's just like, well, it's obvious why watching an ant crawling over a twig for half an hour might be fascinating. The only reason it could possibly not be fascinating is because there's somebody watching it, thinking, I'm wasting this time, I should be saving the planet. Or I should be talking my neighbours into coming to church with me next Sunday. Or even, I should be completing my collection of beer mats so I can become the British beer mat holding champion, maybe. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, I do know that this stuff could sound offensive to the Pope. I mean, we have a fairly liberal Pope at the moment, so I hope it won't. Fairly liberal, not that liberal, but fairly liberal. I won't go down that road, you know. So I hope this stuff, but it could sound offensive, couldn't it? I mean, I basically am. I mean, no, there's no point pretending I'm not saying this. I am basically saying that sitting in the garden watching an ant crawling over a twig has no lesser value, no greater value, but also no lesser value than saving the planet for posterity. I don't know if that's a disgraceful thing to say or not, but it doesn't matter because it's... I'm hesitating because the natural way for me to finish that sentence is to use the word truth. It's the truth, and I don't like using that word. It's a dodgy word. I particularly don't like using it about 45 seconds after mentioning the Pope, so... But it is. It's like... Oh, it can be a terrible shock. I think in a way, the more involved the person is in meaningful pursuits of the kind I'm talking about, the bigger the shock. The bigger the shock. I really feel sorry for the cardinals. You know, if the cardinals suddenly see this, oh my God. It's like the more important the work that we feel we are embarked upon, the greater shock this can be. So that's it. That's it. That's all we're here to talk about. You know, we'll maybe have some questions and some discussion, or we won't. I don't know. There might be some silence. I hope there'll be some chocolate biscuits and coffee. But kind of that's it. That's all we're here to talk about. The possibility of the self-collapsing and the simplicity of what is left. And by the way, the simplicity of what is left might and possibly will contain a vast variety of stuff. It's just whatever happens. I mean, I'm not implying that any particular kind of life might be led after that, any particular feelings might be felt, or, very importantly, that any particular kind of feelings might not be felt. Because those of us who kind of, I mean, like me, for example, I have a past as a very, not particularly holy, but a very, very sincere spiritual seeker. And those of us who've got that kind of a past, and whatever, we might sort of feel like, oh, well, it would be lovely to be awakened, wouldn't it? Because apart from the fact that I will obviously attract huge numbers of followers who will shower me with gold, there'll be no more anger or sadness. Let's forget that absolute rubbish, you know. If you were a slightly wiser seeker, then you might have also read, you know, some of the kind of more down-to-earth, grounded stuff, like the Zen stuff and so forth, and you might have actually then picked up, no, it doesn't sound as simple as that. So anything can happen. All we're talking about is the self-collapses and the stories collapse. You know, I can't sit here and assert anything absolutely, so I can't sit here and, because anything can happen, I can't just sit here and assert that when the self collapses, it is impossible to sustain any of these stories of meaning. I once met a woman who absolutely seemed to have seen this, absolutely, and she was an Episcopalian minister, and she was still an Episcopalian minister. I can't make sense of that, but she made sense of it. Well, so what? You know, so anything can happen. Absolutely anything can happen. And that includes kind of any feeling or emotion which arose before. Can happen. It is quite likely that they will change in their nature. It's quite likely, but it's not definite. And I'm not going to bang on now about how they might change, because I feel I've gone on long enough for an introductory talk, but if anybody wants to ask a question about that later, they can. You know, but anything can happen. You know, and anybody who, you know, has a belief that maybe that's not the case hasn't been paying enough attention to the more down-to-earth spiritual paths. I call them paths, but they're not really paths. You know, particularly hasn't been paying enough attention to the kind of more Zen side of Buddhism. You know, so the Korean Zen master, whose name I've temporarily forgotten, who said, "Nobody knows sorrow like a Zen master." Awakening is the end of sorrow, no? Why should it be? Why should it be? Listen to the Korean Zen master, and so on. I won't labour the point. I mean, one quote is enough for that. So after seeing this, anything can happen. It's quite likely that certain things won't happen anymore, but it's possible anything can happen. But it's the end of the person, it's the end of seeking, and usually it's the end of all those stories of meaning and purpose and grandiosity. I mean, those stories of meaning and purpose, they feed our grandiose nature, and then they die. I think that's more than long enough for an introductory talk, so I'm going to stop there. We've got about approximately 47.5 minutes to biscuit time, not that I'm counting. So we'll just see what happens now. I'm just wondering whether we might, should we push those windows to, do you think, in view of the children or not?
Richard, if I look at thoughts that are happening, most of them are about certain beliefs that you mentioned with the morals and things like that. So if the self really falls away, is that not also that there are hardly any thoughts anymore? That, why should there be any thinking of? For what?
There's no rules. There's absolutely no rules. You'll meet individuals, I call it. You meet individuals who say there's been very little thought, or the thoughts that arise are kind of practical thoughts. You know, like, I think I'll buy some potatoes to cook tonight. And you meet other individuals, all just goes on. I mean, there aren't any rules, but there are tendencies. And the one of the tendencies that I talk about, I've talked about it often before, is that there is a strong tendency that the neurotic, let's call them thoughts, the neurotic thought feelings, let's say, part feeling, part thoughts, often. There is a strong tendency for a lot of neurotic energy to be lost, or some neurotic energy to be lost, or all the neurotic energy to be lost. All of that is possible. Because again, as I've said many times, we're talking about an energetic shift here. You know, we're not talking about something philosophical or something which involves just a change of opinion or a change of thinking patterns. It can seem like that. So, for example, somebody who hears about this and wants to induce it in themselves might try to do that by trying to quieten their thoughts. I mean, that's, you know, quite a kind of common path for people to go down, because you can't induce this in yourself. It doesn't matter what you do. You know, I mean, some techniques can be quite helpful to the psychophysical organism, and some techniques can be pretty horrible for it, but none of them can kind of get us to this. But in actuality, it's just no rules. So thought might go on, thought might stop, but there is a strong tendency for neurosis to lessen or possibly end. Quite often what happens is that neurosis lessens and then kind of the rest of it gradually unwinds in the story of time. That quite often happens. Neurotic thoughts tend to be particularly gripping and obsessive. So that's likely to lessen or end.
Well, I just think that the implications of this eye dropping seems to be so radical. If you look at what all depends on this eye in our so-called culture, you mentioned already morals, ethics, almost everything.
All the stories.
And if that drops, I mean, then you are in a world which is certainly very different from your own perception.
Yeah, so all of those stories, I mean, again, absolutely no absolute rules, but all of that stuff tends to drop in spite of the Episcopalian minister I mentioned. You know, there are outliers or exceptions or whatever. Yeah, but there is a conditioned mind here. I mean, unless there's physical death as well, there's a conditioned mind, and some minds are more conditioned than others, some minds are more neurotic than others, obviously. I mean, I'm using the word mind very, very loosely. What I really mean is there's a conditioned brain, but we tend to think in terms of a mind even though it doesn't actually exist. So what happens is unpredictable, but there are tendencies, yeah. But it is actually very simple, you know, I mean, in the sense that, you know, we're not talking about something which means the end, necessarily the end of all thought, or even the end of all beliefs. We're not talking about that, or the end of all neurosis. We're not talking about that. We're talking about this very, you know, very simple central thing, that the central peg that everything else is hung on falls out of the wall. The sense of self, all of that. All of that hangs on the sense of self. Mm.
There's no center then anymore.
There never was a center, but there's the feeling, you know, well, we'll call, you know, there's the kind of thought, feeling, belief, whatever you want to call it, that there's a center there. Of course, that was always unreal, but it couldn't be seen to be unreal. So yeah, we could say there's no center anymore, or there is at last there's a seeing that there never was a center. Yeah. I mean, that's in a way what the laughter is often about. When this is seen, it does often provoke laughter, and it's that, like, it's such a joke that all that stuff that the centre seemed to take seriously, all of it was never, words fail me, it was never anything, because the centre that took it seriously never actually existed. It's not like seeing that the person I think I am ends. It's the seeing that never existed in the first place. It was never a reality.
But how is it possible to see this very clearly and to lose it again and back and forth when it happens a few times?
Well, there's two different things I'd say about that. One is there can definitely be this kind of sense of kind of going into this, you know, and then it's kind of lost, and then, you know, that absolutely that can happen, because again there are no rules. You know, there is, if you like, an absolutely unique psychophysical organism sitting there and there and there and there and there, and there's no rules. That's one thing, right? But there's another possibility, which I feel sometimes when I'm talking to people, I feel is what's going on, is that what can appear to be lost isn't actually that seeing. You see, what can happen is, it doesn't have to be like this, but that kind of absolute seeing, I mean, something that I haven't covered yet is the seeing of nothing and the seeing of everything, but you're familiar with that. You know, the kind of full seeing, as I sometimes call it, is the seeing that this is empty and therefore it's nothing. This is empty and that is empty and therefore it is nothing. But it is also full. As well as being empty, it is also full. and so it is also everything. And if that sounds paradoxical for now, I'm sorry, but we can come back and pick that apart later if we want to. So there's that seeing that this is full of, I use the phrase unconditional love, and again we can come back and talk about that later if we want to. So it's empty, and it's full, and it's unconditional love, and that can feel absolutely wonderful. Who for? For no one. Absolutely for no one. That feeling is not located anywhere, and it doesn't belong to anyone. It can just be a feeling of absolute wonder and awe, and it's transformative. It can be like that. It doesn't have to be. It can be like that. And that feeling, I don't like saying things absolutely. I was going to say never lasts, but I want to say as far as I know, or almost never lasts in that, in that overpowering absolute sense. And so what can be felt is, if it's that feeling, if you like, that can be mistaken for what I'm talking about here. So when and as that fades, as it almost inevitably will, it gives a chance for the mind to come back in again and say, aha, there you go, you thought you had it, but you lost it. You see, you thought you had it, you thought that was it, and you thought it's going to be like this forever, and now you've lost it. Now, listen to me, alright, matey, listen to your mind. I am the best and most intelligent part of you. Listen to me, and I will get you back to it. I've just seen this wonderful book on Yogananda, and he's got this terrific technique, and there's an organisation, and if you sign up for that and start doing Yogananda yoga and the breathing exercises, or just come on one more trip to Rishikesh to see your favourite guru. Come on, I know you got diarrhea last time, but it doesn't matter. This time, get the right tablets, take them with you. 4 more months of brown rice and chanting, and that's all it's going to take. That's what the mind can do, you see. So it feels to me from talking, I've talked to a lot of people over the years about this, and it feels to me that's a kind of reasonably common pattern, that if you mistake, you see this word bliss comes up. Bliss, and bliss is not a bad word when there's the kind of the full force of seeing that this is everything and nothing and is unconditional love. Bliss is not a bad word to describe that, you see. And so then the mind goes, well, there you are, that's it. That's what this consists of. It's that sense of overpowering bliss. And what's happened? It's faded, hasn't it? It's faded. Go on, admit it. It's faded, hasn't it? It's faded, because usually it does fade. So then, I know I'm talking here, schizophrenically. There's a me and there's a mind, and then, but just go along with it as a kind of play, a little drama, which is a lot more interesting than a soap opera on television. But never mind. Just listen to me, says the mind, and I can get you back to that. But the bliss is just. It's just bliss. It's all right. I'm not mocking bliss. Bliss is nice. But this has got nothing to do with living in a permanent state of bliss. There's no such thing as a permanent state of anything. So that's what can happen, that there can be this tremendous intensity about an awakening or a liberation. I'll call it an experience, although it isn't. And then later, when that fades, the mind says, come on. Come down to the travel agent, buy that ticket to India. Pack your rucksack, you like it. There might be some lovely hippie chick as well up there. You might get the double whammy of enlightenment plus a hippie chick in the Himalayas.
It's true.
So it can be like that.
Yeah.
It can be like that.
Yeah.
Because in a way, it's all very well for anyone like me to sit at the front of a room like this talking about the intensity of an enlightenment event, an awakening event, a liberation event. But, really what we're talking about here is so bloody ordinary. It is just the most, in a way, it's seeing And this is ordinary, really ordinary for the first time, and that's kind of what's wonderful about it in a way. I mean, as long as I see this as a stage upon which I can enact the melodrama of saving souls for Jesus, then it doesn't seem ordinary. I mean, in a way, that's why we make up these stories, or why we follow other people who've made up these stories before us, because it makes it so wonderfully melodramatic. The person doesn't want the ordinary. The person gets really bored with the ordinary. And so we buy these wonderfully dramatic stories. My life isn't ordinary. I've saved 4 souls for Jesus this month. But when all of that falls away, then we're just left with, absolutely ordinary. Why would anybody want more than the ordinary? I mean, look at it. So it can be like that. It can be that sort of sense of disappointment. It's not bliss anymore. No, of course not. Nothing's permanent. I mean, I think the Buddhists are really good about something. They're really bad about other things, but they're really good about something. This is one of the things they're really good at. Everything's impermanent. Everything's transient. There's no permanent states. This is a state, therefore it is impermanent. Comes and goes. For the person, it might seem important that it comes and goes. When the person collapses, it's a bit, well, so what? So I don't know that that's what's going on, but I do know, from talking to quite a few people, I do have a very strong feeling it's what's going on in quite a few cases. It's just that last drama of the mind to hang on and say, this isn't good enough. This may be non-duality, whatever, but it's not good enough. Stick with me, buddy, and I will get you to a better form of non-duality than this. But that's just more of the mind projecting itself into the future. That's how the mind keeps us permanently dissatisfied and permanently cut off from this, by projecting us into the future and by projecting back into the past.
So there are
as long as I've got regret about the past or hope about the future, it's it's a sort of an artificial liveliness. It keeps me away from the boredom and dullness of being a person.
So both is possible that the mind have this power, or it loses this power.
Yeah, and of course, we're talking a little bit metaphorically, because of course really there isn't such a thing as the mind, but there is a kind of a process. So the process of minding, if you like, of this whirring thing that produces these thoughts.
The power.
Or in the shock of awakening or liberation or whatever you want to call it, that can be lost for a while in the story of time, and then it can that's often what happens. People often report a period of time. For some reason, I don't really understand why, it's about 2 years often comes up, that for about 2 years after kind of awakening liberation, there can be a lot of just sort of sitting around staring at the horizon with not much happening. And then after that, kind of things can sort of return to a more sort of normal, whatever that means, kind of level, and then maybe some more activity is then engaged in. But in extreme cases, there are stories of individuals who basically just sort of sit on a park bench for about 2 years. I don't know why it should be 2 years, but that often comes up in this story. It doesn't matter anyway. There was a woman in America years ago, I never met her, but I had a friend who became involved with her, not romantically, but spiritually. And the story with her was she just sort of sat around for 2 years after she saw us, there was nothing coming up to do anything. Then after 2 years, she sort of became active in the world again.
So no rules.
No, there's no rules, no. There are tendencies, but there's no rules. Yeah. Yeah.
This cognitive emotional pattern when the ego falls away, is this happening in consciousness, or do you think it has also like in the brain structures some kind of physical representation, so that neural networks are differently connected or something?
Yeah, I think it would be fascinating. You know, when brain science advances even more than it has now, we could maybe hook people up. If we hooked a random number of people up, I don't know how many we'd need, maybe about 50 million people, and then we'd have a reasonable statistic. It'd be a bit like searching for the Higgs boson. We'd have a reasonable chance that, you know, one of those people would be hooked up at the point at which the self disappeared, and then we could see what happened in the brain. You know, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I don't, it's just an opinion. I'm not even a neuroscientist. That doesn't stop me from giving uneducated opinions about it. Why should it? You know? So, I mean, I've come all the way here from London. I can sort of give opinions about anything I like, about how little I know about them. But I strongly suspect that, there's so much evidence that kind of whatever it is that's appearing in this, and however it seems to be appearing, has such a powerful rooting physically in what's going on in the brain. I think probably, you know, yeah. And the first thing you started about, I don't think, I mean, it's a word you use the word conscious, it's a word I tend to avoid because it doesn't seem to me to add anything other than the possibility of confusion. I mean, I'm kind of in a way, when I say, you know, all there is this, and everything, having every thought about the past, every expectation of the future you've ever had, ever will have, are having now, is only happening in this. We could reframe that and say, or rephrase it and say, it's happening in consciousness, or it's happening in awareness, and it seems to be all we've then done is added the possibility of a great deal more confusion, because then we go off chasing down the road, well, what is consciousness, what is awareness, what does that mean? You know. And those are good questions for keeping the mind running uselessly, absolutely uselessly. I find those, well, I don't find the questions tiresome, but I find the kind of answers that you tend to get unbelievably tiresome. I'll just throw in a couple of things there. Years ago, I came across a reference in a book to an encyclopedia of psychology, and it said under the entry for consciousness, it had this very, very simple few-word description, something like consciousness is the subjective experience of awareness, something like that. And then underneath it just said, nothing worth reading has ever been written about this. And I thought, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's just a minefield. It's just those two words, conscious and awareness, are just an invitation to totally baseless, groundless speculation and philosophizing. Endlessly, endlessly, endlessly. You know, I mean, there's just this. I mean, if we want to reframe it, how do we know that there's anything going on? Because there's experience. I mean, surely that is unarguable. There's experience. Now, what does this mean? It means experience is arising. How does it add anything to that to say, oh, well, experience is arising in consciousness, as if there's something separate from the experience itself? So I think those words are endlessly, they invite endless stories and endless delusion. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, so apart from this thing, there's a YouTube, you can watch this if you like, except I'm not going to tell you the people involved, so you'll have difficulty tracking it down, out of some probably misplaced sense that I should not insult other speakers about this, particularly not on camera anyway, although I am aware I could cut the next bit out if I wanted to when editing this day. But there's I think it's one of the YouTube discussion. I believe it was taken at one of the American Science and Non-duality conferences, so there's a clue. And it is between two luminaries of the field. Luminaries whose YouTube postings get tens upon tens of thousands of views and followers. So there's another cue. So this is an hour and a half discussion, and the topic is what is consciousness? And it's being moderated by a nice woman who's presenting it, and there's an audience there, and one of them is a luminary of the self-inquiry school. I hope I'm not giving too many clues away here. And the other one is a luminary who runs his own spiritual development school. So there's a few little clues dotted around here. Why am I being so mysterious? Anyway, the point of the story, this video is at least an hour and a half long. Believe me, I have not watched it all, but I did watch the beginning of it. It becomes completely obvious within about the first 4.5 minutes that these two luminaries, these are not kind of beginners at this game. These are people who've had years and years practice in this game. It's quite obvious after 3 minutes they do not agree about what the word consciousness means. Very politely, and I'm sure they go on disagreeing it very politely for the next hour and a half, except, unfortunately, after about 5 minutes, I thought if I watch any more of this, I'm going to end up slitting my throat, so I stopped watching it. That may have to be edited out as well. But there's a kind of point here, isn't there? If these two luminaries, these are not beginners, these are people who have been talking and thinking and writing about this stuff for decades, and they don't agree with what this very simple word conscious means, then what the hell is the bloody point? Wouldn't we probably not only be better off in the sense that we could go down the pub and have a beer instead, but also wouldn't we be mentally less confused if we just said, this is a really unhelpful concept, let's ditch it. What the hell does it add? And the same with that other word, awareness. I do use those words sometimes, and I'm even guilty of using them in books. I think occasionally they can be useful for, explaining certain points that are difficult to explain. But I mean, basically, what the hell's consciousness? What is it? Usually there are two different interpretations. One is it's some sort of mysterious magical effluvia that permeates the universe and makes all of this possible. Well, maybe it is. How would I know? I don't know. But so what? Who cares? We can't ever know. It's just baseless speculation. The best kind of speculation is the baseless kind, because that's the kind that can go on forever. So if my hobby is speculating, then baseless speculation is the best deal, isn't it? Heaven forfend that I should speculate about something which actually has an answer, because then I might reach the answer and my hobby's over. I have to find a different thing to speculate about then. But consciousness, awareness, we can go on speculating forever. So usually the idea is either that consciousness is this kind of magical effluvia that makes this all possible, which reminds me of like the phlogiston theory in the 19th century, which seemed like a reasonable theory at the time, or the ether theory in the 90s. They both seemed like reasonable theories at the time. It just turned out that they weren't necessary. We were just inventing something that wasn't needed to explain physical reality. So either we've got this effluvia, or I think even worse from my point of view, consciousness is regarded as a kind of inner ability which can be developed somehow. So I may start with a sort of lower level of consciousness, but by following assiduously a spiritual path and doing my spiritual practices with great devotion, I can raise my level of consciousness, which is another very tiring thing, which is likely to keep me away from much more entertaining things to do, like going to the pub. And obviously, the world is awash with spiritual schools which claim that they will teach you how to raise your level of consciousness. Which is a kind of another of those stories that keep us on the wheel of searching, what the Buddhists call the wheel of samsara. endlessly, because if I bought that story that I have something called personal consciousness, which is possible to raise the level of, then I can go on doing that forever. Or whatever. And actually both of these are just kind of like completely unnecessary. They're just made up. A bit like Christianity, it's just a story, it's just made up. It's just difficult to see that these things are simply made up stories when we've been conditioned all our lives to think that they're real. You know, that's just another story. I mean, consciousness is the most obvious thing there is, isn't it? Well, actually, the only obvious thing there isn't. The only obvious thing there is that experience is happening. You know, the lights are on rather than off. So experience is happening. You know. But if you really feel you want to watch the full hour and a half, then come to me afterwards and I'll tell you who it was. I'm just not going to do it on camera. I have to maintain a little mystique somehow.
This so-called awakened masters.
Yeah.
Why are they inventing these games and this it's a joke. So the people are meditating or doing something to get along.
Yeah, well, there's different things in there. I mean, let's come to things like meditation later, because, you know, there's a lot of stuff you can do which I would say is therapeutic, you know, for the suffering person.
Yes.
You know, so we can come to that separately. I mean, well, you know, there could be all sorts of answers to that. But one thing is, if you see yourself as a teacher, you've got to have something to teach. I don't know if you've caught up with it. I'm just catching up now. We were talking about it last night. There's this wonderful 6-hour documentary on Netflix about Osho, about Bhagwan Roshi and the ashrams are there. Have you counted the number of people in this room? Have you counted the number of people in this room? Compared to, you know, have you counted the number?
Compared to Osho.
Have you counted the number of $1 million diamond watches that I'm wearing and the number of Rolls Royces that I've left in my garage back in England?
It's yours. Here on the street, it's yours.
No, what, the Rolls Royce? Actually, no, not even a single Rolls Royce on the street. So, I mean, teachers need to have something to teach. Spiritual masters, I mean, you use that word, spiritual master. What's a spiritual master? It's just again, it's a lovely, wonderful phrase upon which we can project, you know, these tremendous stories. You know, I mean, a spiritual master to a spiritual seeker is the equivalent of a cardinal to a Roman, it's equivalent of Pope Francis to a Roman Catholic. It's a figure upon which we can project all our yearnings. You know, it's a huge thing. It's a huge. These stories and these figures only exist because one of the most absolutely common things that we do as suffering people, as people who do not feel fulfilled in life, is we project all our yearnings out onto what we see as these magical figures out there. We see them as magical because we don't see ourselves as magical. I mean, that's another thing. Again, I'm getting pretty dangerously close to saying some absolute things here about, oh, this always happens, which is a very dangerous place for me to go, because somebody will instantly say, well, it doesn't happen for me. So I won't say that. I'll stick with it. It's a very powerful tendency. What else ends? The person ends. What does it take with them? The stories of meaning and purpose. Probably some, a lot of, or maybe all of the person's neurosis. And connected to that, because it's very neurotically based, something else that it will almost certainly or probably take is some, many, or all of the projections. Those projections just become impossible anymore. One of the problems that can arise for the kind of convicted spiritual seeker, when this is suddenly seen, is that, you know, a lot of their life might have been hung on that, and a lot of their relationships in life might be hanging on that. One of the problems that can arise is that when this is seen, all of that spiritual stuff just tends to again end. You know, and if you and your partner have been running an ashram for the Guru together, that can create real problems. But you know, we're entitled to ask ourselves the question: why is there usually such an absolute end to all of that spiritual seeking? It's because the projections end. There's no more belief in it. You know, I mean, up to that point, it's like, my God, Guruji. You know, I've been running an ashram for Guruji, and we have his photograph, we have his videos, and every Tuesday night we chant, and every Thursday night we have a video, and oh, it's just so wonderful, and it's such work, I'm saving the planet, and it's just absolutely wonderful, and then horror of horrors, there's awakening, or liberation, and it's like, bang, that's over. Why is it over? Because suddenly Guruji is just another person. There aren't any masters, or we could say, everyone's a master. You are the master. You are your own master. That's a bit dangerous saying that, because then we can get into follow your inner guru. Follow your inner guru. Follow your outer guru. It doesn't matter, because one or the other or neither or both is going to happen anyway. It's got nothing to do with who you think you are. But we might as well say you're the master. You know, so all of that. What is sometimes wonderful fun, I mean, it is, for some of us, that is the best fairground in the world. You know, forget Disney World. Forget it. The best fairground in the world is the ashram. For some of us, it is just incredible. You know, part of the reason it's just incredible is because that guy sitting in the seat ain't no ordinary fellow. He is a fully enlightened master. Every bloody chakra in his auric body is whizzing at full speed, and there are no samskaric blocks left. You know, every single past life issue has been burnt out of him by his wonderful sadhana or whatever. And here I am chanting and and all of that ends because there are no masters. Or each of us is a master. It doesn't matter which way we put it. Each of us is. Each of us is in Osho. We may not have so many Rolls Royces. It's like, I mean, that can be really shocking when it's seen. It can also be a great freedom. But it's like, that is, again, something that tends to disappear with the neurosis, or some of the neurosis is just that projection. I mean, projection works in two ways. You know, there's negative projection, where I project on you all the negative stuff in myself that I don't acknowledge. But then there's the positive projection, where I project onto you all the positive stuff in myself I don't acknowledge. And that's the projection that the cardinals, Pope Francis, and the gurus get. And then it's over, and there's just a guy sitting on a chair, and you might still like him. Or there's a woman sitting on a chair, and you might still like her. But the projection's gone. But going back to your question, which was a long time ago, there can be all sorts of reasons teachers have to teach. You can't be a teacher without teaching something. You know, if you're up there as a guru, as an enlightened master, you're expected to give something, whatever it is, japa, meditation, something, discourses, it doesn't matter. But you know, there are some interesting statements from the masters. Maybe caught off guard, or maybe in particular moments of honesty, you know, who knows? I mean, Osho was supposed to have come out with a few of those when he was under the influence of laughing gas, but the one that comes to me is Muktananda. Muktananda is the Siddha Yoga Guru, and incredibly traditional, and every single minute of the day in the ashram is filled with something, studying Kashmiri Shaivite philosophy, cleaning the toilets, meditation, chanting, devotion to the Guru, singing the Guru Gita, on and endless on, you know. I mean, you get up early in the morning, you're fed very little, you're kept hard at work, you're kept tired. This is the way to keep Westerners out of mischief in an ashram, by the way. Particularly feed them a very low protein diet, where you're going to have a lot of monkey business going on. All those Americans and Australians there living in very close quarters. So Siddha Yoga was a really typical kind of, traditional spiritual ashram path which had somehow accidentally almost attracted vast numbers of Western followers, never as vast as Osho, but nevertheless huge number, mostly Western followers. And I thought this was wonderful actually. Muktananda said towards the end, he said sadhana, in other words, all the stuff you're doing in the ashram, all your spiritual work and path and he said you are all, I believe this is a quote from a letter, so it's sort of written down, this isn't hearsay. You are all God. I haven't got the exact quote, but something like you are all God already if only you could see it. Sadhana is simply a kind of constructive way to use the time between birth and death. And all the stories, yes, I saw that go up there, and all the stories that the devotees would build around that. I mean, like for example, there was a time when the Siddha Yogis were big into Kriyas because Muktananda wrote a lot about Kriyas in his autobiography, and so you had these massive Kriyas going on during meditation. Meditation was horrible. Couldn't meditate because people would be howling like monkeys and barking like dogs and throwing themselves around and having these incredible spasms and so forth because Kriyas were a sign of great spiritual advancement. And then there came a point when Muktananda announced that Kriyas were no longer necessary for spiritual development and they all suddenly stopped. Really bizarre. And then the other story, which I don't think is authenticated absolutely, most people think, is that some of Muktananda's senior people began to suspect that all was not quite what it seemed, and maybe the assiduous study of Kashmiri Shaivite philosophy for sort of 120 hours wasn't quite as necessary to enlightenment as they'd been told. That they went to Muktananda and said, there isn't anything else but this, is there? That's all there is, it's just this, isn't it? And he said, yes. Well, there's nothing else, there's nothing to work, And another thing he is supposed to have said is, there will come a time when you will be so angry with me. It's like, that's the point at which you wake up. It's like, that's the point at which we're not children anymore. I mean, in a way, these massive projections we put onto... And if we're spiritually inclined, it might be Osho and Muktananda. If we're religiously inclined, it might be Pope Francis or the Archbishop of Canterbury. If we're politically inclined, it might be, the head of the... Whoever, it doesn't matter, but it's like it renders us as children, and not in a good way, not in the way that Jesus may have meant, if he ever actually existed, and if he ever actually said those words, unless ye become as children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. But until we see through these projections, we are like children and not in a good way. And when it's like, you see, it's very tricky language. I was going to say it's like when we see through ourselves, but we don't see through ourselves. It's like when the self is seen through, and there is no more me to see through myself. That is a kind of growing up in the sense that these projections die, and then we know that we can't then see. It's like, well, there's me and there's the master. It can't be like that anymore. Now, if you enjoy the master's personality and the people around the master, then of course we might still find ourselves going off to the ashram. Why not? Why not? But the projection's gone. And then there's just a guy sitting up there, and there's a guy sitting down here. It's just the guy that's sitting up there happens to have a watch that cost $1 million, and I don't. It's a kind of really radical realignment of everything. Yeah. I mean, I think that's as close to an absolute rule as I could get to saying it's an absolute radical realignment of everything. What we can't say is in each individual, unique case, what form that radical realignment will take. There's no rules about that at all. But a radical realignment, yeah, that's pretty likely. Yeah. And that could mean, for example, a radical realignment in your relationship where it ends, because it turns out that what held the two of you together was the fact that you both worshipped, in inverted commas, being intelligent Westerners, we'd never really use that word, but we don't worship. But nevertheless, you know, we were very devoted and we ran an ashram for whoever it was, Osho, Muktananda, or any one of a dozen or 100 or 1,000 others. And suddenly for one of us that's over. And if that's what kept the relationship together, if it is, then that relationship will probably be over. So this can be hugely, hugely disruptive. Or it can have no disruptive effect whatsoever. I had a chap used to come to my talks in London. He's abandoned me now, for some reason. No, he used to come. And he had to keep it deadly secret from his partner. He's not the only one either. I don't know where he told his partner. I used to joke with him, you know, that he was telling his partner he was either going to an opium den, a brothel, or a gambling house, because all of those would have been more acceptable to his partner. Hear me talk about non-duality.